So good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Edna Levine, and I'm Director of Community Engagement at the Atlantic Jewish Council, and I'm excited to welcome you to our 17th Annual Holocaust Education Week. All our programs this year are virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the program this evening is presented in partnership with the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, the Halifax Central Library, the University of King's College, with special guests from the Zapomniane Foundation. All of our Holocaust Education Week programs are made possible in part by a generous grant from the Azrieli Foundation. The program this evening, Speculative Cartographies, mapping 5 mass graves in the forests of eastern Poland, is a program that is presented in 2 parts. It's an exhibit which can be viewed virtually. It is also at the Halifax Central Library until Sunday. And information on this program, which you can get at the Halifax Central Library as well, you can have this information also virtually, contains information about the exhibit. And also, the program is this evening's presentation of the research by the creators of the program, Solomon Nagler and Angela Henderson from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. Holocaust research, the testimonies of survivors, as well as that of local townsfolk, revealed the details of the journey of Jews, many who endeavored to escape persecution and fled to the surrounding forests. In 2018, we were privileged to host in Halifax Holocaust survivor Maxwell Smart. His memoirs were published by the Azrieli Foundation, and he recounted his survival for several years in a small dugout which he built in a forest in Poland. He told of a most haunting memory that one day, after he heard a lot of gunfire, when all was quiet and he went out to explore, he discovered on the banks of the river a family who had been murdered. Not too far from that spot, he found their dugout, and he was surprised to discover that there were other Jews in hiding in that forest. As well, he was impressed at how well their dugout was camouflaged and reinforced. He then, along with a friend, dragged their bodies into the dugout, sealed and camouflaged their mass grave in the forest. We now fast forward 70 plus years, and questions arise not only to the location of the many hidden mass graves which exist throughout Eastern Europe, but to their impact on the environment and to those who live in close proximity, and how the existence of these mass graves gives us pause and expands our knowledge of the Holocaust and the human spirit. It is my pleasure now to introduce from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, the creators of this project, artists Solomon Nagler and Angela Henderson. The program is presented in the form of a webinar, so if you have any questions, please use the chat and Solomon and Angela will respond to them. Welcome, Solomon and Angela.
Hi there. Thank you, Edna, so much for that introduction, and thank you all for attending. I do want to start just by we are virtual right now, but I just want to tell you, I just want to start by doing a land acknowledgement where I am here in Chipuktuk in Mi'kmahi in unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation, and I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to have been able to make the work here, to teach here, to talk here, to invite community members to talk about the work. And I think these conversations can be ever more poignant considering that we're unceded territory. So thank you very much to my nation for that, for hosting us here. I also want to give a content warning, as most of you know that are here, that of course these conversations are going to be around Holocaust and genocide. And I just want to make sure everyone knows that for some people it may trigger some strong, potentially harmful emotional responses. So I know that we're expecting these sort of conversations to emerge, but I just want to sort of put it out there to just have content warning. As Edna mentioned, this work was created in collaboration with the Rabbinical Commission for Cemeteries, which is the RCC, and the Zapomniane Institute, which are based in Poland, and they do research unmarked mass graves throughout Poland. And together with our collaborators in Poland, who will be giving an artist talk that we pre-recorded because the time zone is a little bit intense for them, that we created this work called Speculative Cartographies, which is actually the first version of it was exhibited in Warsaw Biennale in 2019. And Edna has been really amazing to help us facilitate being able to present this here in our home here in Halifax in a different form, and actually with new works, which is also very exciting. And the word speculative itself is quite an interesting idea, and I think where it comes from is this idea of the sort of restrictions that are imposed there from Jewish Halacha, which means Jewish religious law, that if somebody is buried in a specific space, even if they were murdered, you cannot actually excavate that site. It's very rare. In fact, it's only been one occasion, I think, in Jewish history where the bodies have been moved. One body has been moved, and that was of a tzaddik. But basically, so what that means is that the researchers in Poland, when they're investigating these sites, they engage in, first of all, in oral history accounts to find out where these spaces are, then use new technologies such as LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging, and GPR, which is ground penetrating radar, along with archival research and oral history. And I lived in Poland for a couple of years working with the community, and my good friends are working with the institution, and we realize, and actually we're not alone, there's a lot of other Polish and some Polish Jewish artists that see that this is really a space for artists to participate in the conversation of what it means to engage with this difficult history in a way of also experimenting with what a counter memorialization might look like, because we can't really put in a permanent memorial because there's so much uncertainty there, and also these spaces are very remote. So how is it that we activate this history, which needs to be always put in the forefront of our consciousness in some way? And the more innovative that artists are in the way that they engage with this content, the more of a possibility that we can make this history alive in that sense. And Edna, we had a conversation very earlier on in this inception of the project, and talking about how the Holocaust is actually a shared history. It's not something that belongs to anybody. And I think that's the same with any sort of a history of genocide that any society is sort of like engaging with, and has a difficult history, that it does something that we share in our history. And of course, the people who it's affected the most is something, obviously would be those communities to be able to speak to what they feel is an appropriate way of having these conversations. But it is something that is really important that we all are constantly understanding that it's something that's ever present, which is why when we were invited to show the work at the public library, we thought that was a really poignant proposal. The idea of discussing a difficult history in public space, an unexpected public space itself, is something that's very interesting. When people happen upon the installation, where they discover the installation within their everyday, I think that's actually a really remarkable technique of making sure that people have that sense of self-reflection of these shared histories that we're living. I also want to express my gratitude to all of our, especially to the Holocaust Education Week and the Atlantic Jewish Council, but also all of the amazing people who collaborated with us in this project, specifically our RAs from NASCAT. We have Kayla Rutterham, who's actually going to be speaking today with her curation, and also Mohammed Hussein Karabakh, and who helped us with the 3D modeling. The Central Library has been really great. I also want to say a big thank you to Hillary and Colleen from the Central Library. You were amazing in really helping us sort of mount the exhibition. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be walking through the exhibition a little bit, and each of the artists are going to speak to their process and some of the concepts that were involved in the inception, creation, and the process of creating this work. I'll sort of just start, and for me, the most logical thing is to really just share with you I'm just putting it here, so the website, which is now live, that you can now navigate it through your own web browsers. And I also want to point here that there are some virtual exhibition spaces works here as well that you will be able to navigate on your own, and our Polish collaborators will speak more to that shortly. Specifically, I guess I can speak to the phytogram work, and then I'm going to pass it on to my collaborator, Angela Henderson. So I am a filmmaker who works in 16 millimeter, and I was trying to figure out how it is that working with analog technology would be able to sort of facilitate a way of mapping the space in a very, experimental, and I guess a very, site-specific process. So what I did is I used this process called phytograms, where you are taking the flora and fauna from the specific area of where the mass grave is situated, and you're soaking it in a biodeveloper, which basically what it does is the chemicals that are inherent in the flora react to that chemistry, and they express themselves in really unique and different ways on the celluloid. And the celluloid itself is actually exposed in the sunlight for a pretty significant period of time. It doesn't need dark space to do that because it actually stains the base of the emulsion. And what I did is I also used the available sunlight that was in these specific spaces that each of the flora was collected and where the mass grave was located to create this 16mm film. Now, it was also presented in Poland as a series of stills on a light table that people were able to sort of sort through and shuffle and also create almost their own sort of montage with the works that were there on the table. But of course, because of COVID, that wasn't something we thought would be the most, I guess we didn't facilitate that at the library. So we decided that we would just sort of present the 16mm film here at the library. Okay. So now I'm actually going to pass on the computer now to Angela, who's right beside me, to talk about her work, and then we will also do a screen share when she wants, and we'll sort of be able to walk through her work that's presented in the exhibition as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for being here, everyone. I guess I want to start by sort of thinking or locating a starting point for the work that we did and engaged in Poland last year. And what I found really interesting in relation to the organization that we were working with is that all of their work begins from first-hand account. So either a witness who was somebody who witnessed the crime, or through kind of the passing down of oral history, somebody of, a second or third generation a family member of somebody who witnessed the crime. So, much like the work that Saul just showed, we were starting from the idea of nature as witness, as most of, or all of these locations are located within the forested regions of eastern Poland. And so, thinking about that idea of what does it mean for nature to bear witness, the way that I kind of began with the project was to think about the development of tools that don't function necessarily as cartographic tools that are intended to depict, the reality of space through calculated measurements or conventional cartographic tools, but rather that results from an embodied experience in the space and from moving in these landscapes and looking really always to the landscape as a site of trauma and how trauma is visible or is present in these landscapes. So maybe what I'll do is I'll share the screen and I'll walk you through a little bit of my work in the exhibition. Okay. So the first work I want to look at is here. This is a series of, okay, sorry, a little technical difficulty. A series of CNC models. And the way, maybe I'll just talk a bit about the way that these were made. What you're looking at here are the 5 different sites, the 5 topographies of the forested sites that we visited in Poland. And typically, when we look at, or maybe I should start with the fact that these models are developed through a series of satellite images that are taken year to year over, the course of about a decade. So through a process of photogrammetry, which is essentially a way of assembling a three-dimensional model using images of a space, these models, these layers of the landscape are compressed over time. And because, each of these forests, they're managed sites, they're all forests, primarily large forests that are harvested. So a lot of the kind of removal of the forests, or of the trees in these forests, results in sort of anomalies and absences in the ground. Additionally, the graves as well create these sort of absences in the space. So by taking these satellite images and layering them onto one another over the course of a decade, certain anomalies and glitches emerged in the models. And what I think is another important aspect here is when we think of, GPS information, it has the ability to, locate us exactly in space, but we're removed from the actual physical experience of the space. So I wanted to think about, what does it mean to craft a landscape, both from, this kind of satellite imagery, but also at a scale where one might say, hold it, in your hand. So kind of collapsing this embodied and digital space together into this form, but also this kind of, time lapse or time space and physical space into the form. The second part in the exhibition that is my work is a combination of sculpture and drawings. You can see sort of an installation view here. Maybe I'll start with the sculptures. So, in these spaces, my approach to thinking, about demarcating the grave, which is really the objective of the foundation that we're working with, was to, again, look to nature and to think about the trees that existed in this space that were old enough to have witnessed what happened there. So again, through sort of an embodied experience, I used the arm span of my arms to sort of, hug the tree in a way, or to wrap my arms around it to kind of understand the perimeter. And so what you're looking at in these sculptures, the black string, this is all string, represents the actual measure of the tree. And then the white string in between is the distance to the next tree, and then the distance to the next tree, and then the distance to until it's a closed circumference around the grave site. And so another thing that was sort of, bringing this work here and having this kind of measure was, and then remounting it in the context of the Holocaust Education Week, I was looking also to sites of trauma here in Nova Scotia. And one site that I visit quite a lot, and I'm sure many of us do, is in Point Pleasant Park, where there's currently a renewal, or I guess it's a rewilding project that's taking place, where much of the trees in Point Pleasant Park are being raised. So all of the branches, the forms that hold this string wrapping are the fallen branches that were taken from Point Pleasant Park. So thinking about this concept of, mapping one site of trauma onto another site of trauma. Just a bit of a detail. So you can see here in each of the maps, the actual real-time measure of the perimeter of the grave site is noted. Now the third part of the work in this exhibition, these are studies, and I'm entitling them each as studies for a memory site, 1 through 5. And so these, I would say, originated in sort of a site-specific context to my studio. It's hard to see in these pictures, but the sort of structure that underpins these sort of graphite explorations is taken from the lines that are inscribed on the drafting board that is in my studio. So I've sort of laid down these lines with a tool that inscribes a line into the surface of the paper without actually making a mark, and then built these graphite sort of, I'm going to call them kind of thoughts or explorations onto that grid. So again, you know, working from this place of memory and thinking about how violence inscribes itself onto a landscape, you know, many kind of, I was thinking about the many ways that these landscapes are perceived by different, you know, where there's different perspectives held about these landscapes, be it via a witness, through digital technologies, through the community kind of conceptualization or stigma related to these sites, the historical layers of information, and the way that the natural world exhibits the violence in these places. So I call these studies because I feel they're a way forward in thinking about kind of this intuitive, I suppose, way of I want to say depicting, but that's not the right word, but thinking about how violence inscribes itself on landscape. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ange. Okay, so now Kayla Rutterham is here. And Kayla, maybe if you're cool with it, would you like me to screen share the documentation of the work that you created? You can speak to it with that.
Sure.
Okay, cool. I'm going to do that.
Yep.
So you can start whenever you'd like.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kayla Rutterham, and I am a research assistant with Saul and Angela's project. And I was asked to curate designated information from this project in a designated space. This show was originally supposed to be in another gallery, but I think it ended up working well that the show ended up in these shelving units, just because I think they draw a lot of parallels between the content in the show as well as like the exhibition space. I'm not sure if any of you have seen the show in person, but this shelving unit is kind of like hidden and isolated in like the holds area. So I thought it was a nice comparison between the content that we're talking about with all of these hidden spaces and the hideouts that were in the forest in Poland. Something that immediately struck me when I was presented with this information was that there was a distinct division between the information that was collected. For example, there is information that was from like above head, like there is information from like a sky view. Then there was information from the ground level, from everything that's like on the surface of the earth, and then there's things that are underground. And I thought that would be an interesting way to display the information, since there's so many layers and tiers to the information that is in this show. There were I was immediately struck by all of the images in the of the different sites that are in Poland, and I wanted them to kind of be like the focus of the show, because I felt that they were so effective in communicating the feeling of the sites. I found that the feeling that I got from these images were emptiness, yet they were really full. They were haunting and somber, but I just found them to be very powerful, and I wanted that to be reflected in the way that they were displayed. You may also notice that there are many blank spaces in the information presented in the shelving units, and that kind of reflects how there are missing parts of history. Like, we don't have all of the pieces to tell this whole story, but we have the parts that we do have, and we will show them and come to conclusions based on what we have found and what we have to share. What else can I say about this? there were different levels of information that needed to be presented, like personal accounts, archival information, as well as scientific data. And I wanted to do that in a way that wasn't going to sanitize the information or like take away any of its like significance or importance. But I also wanted to do that without potentially triggering or harming anybody in the process. Like I didn't want the focus to be on the trauma, but I wanted the trauma to be known, but not into so much detail that it could instill more trauma into other people. So yeah, I was very careful about the wording of all of the information that was included in this display. Yeah, I think that if difficult histories aren't discussed or shared, it's easier to dismiss or disassociate or dehumanize the people that were like directly affected by those things. So I think it's important to humanize and make the people and the connections that we have with each other and other people the focus of shows that have to do with content like this. Does that
Awesome.
make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you, Kayla. And I noticed that there's a few questions coming up, but I would like to maybe, if we're okay, everyone, to just now show you the video of our Polish collaborators, and then Kayla, Angela, and I can answer whatever questions that any of you folks might have about the exhibition or anything else. So we're going to go on to the two people that are speaking next via recording are Wukash Baksik, who is the photographer who created Matsevot for Everyday Life. And again, you can see that exhibition, Everyday Use, sorry. And you can see that exhibition actually on our website. It's a virtual exhibition. And our other collaborator is Alexandra Janus, and she's in Poland. She was one of the people that collaborated with us in the Speculative Cartographies exhibition in Warsaw. Also created the 16mm film that's screening at the library and virtually as well. But without further ado, I'm going to show you the video. It runs about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open the floor for some questions. So here, I'm just going to put myself on mute because I don't have a video. Okay, here we go.
Hello, my name is Wukash Baksik, and I would like to tell you a little bit about one of my projects, Matsevot for Everyday Use. This is a project in which I was documenting how the Jewish gravestones were repurposed as a building material. So it sounds, I think, a little bit weird if we're talking about gravestones and being used as a building material. So maybe let me give you a little bit of the background for this project. So this precedence of using the Jewish gravestones started during the World War II, and it was initiated by Nazi Germans, the occupants. And soon the Poles started to do exactly the same. And this actually continued after the war until late 80s. And for me, the moment I found the first information about this precedence, I started to think that I really have to do something about it. So it took me long 10 years from the idea through the research and finally to taking the pictures and preparing exhibition and then the photo book. And during these 10 years, it was for me a very interesting process. So I want to share a few observations that I have after doing this. So maybe let me share my screen with you so that you can see the works in the background. Okay, so as I said, the entire project took me around 10 years. At the very beginning, the research for this project was really hard So I've heard about the first matzevot, which was reused as a grindstone. And when I saw this one, so it was happening while I was visiting various small towns and also bigger towns, but also very, very small villages, looking for the material objects, like proving that there were Jewish people living in Polish towns. So I would visit the towns. I would search for the Jewish cemeteries, synagogues, and other buildings, like whatever you can imagine could be a proof of existence of the Jews before the war in Poland. And on one of those trips, I met a guy who told me about the matzevot that was used as a grindstone. And he actually showed me the first stone, which was really a kind of eye-opener for me. And when I saw it, I already knew that the title of my project will be Matzevot for Everyday Use. And also that I really have to do something about it. So at the very beginning, I would visit these towns and talk to the local people, trying to get some information about, like, knowing that there was some Jewish population and knowing that there was a Jewish cemetery in their town or in their village. I would ask them, like literally ask them, if they are aware of what happened to this matzevot, because at the moment the cemetery is completely empty. And at the same time, I was quite judgmental, but when I was about this whole process, but also I was talking to a lot of my friends, and what was really interesting for me was that they would ask me questions, or they would try to think that, like, first of all, it were not Poles who did it, but rather Germans. And I had to agree with them at the very beginning. So yes, the Germans started this, but then Poles continued this precedence. So what I'm trying to say is that from the very beginning, I was trying to show the entire spectrum of this problem. So then I would show my friends pictures from small villages, and they would say, like, oh yeah, we are aware that the people from or in the villages were probably doing something like this, but it was not happening in the towns or in the cities. So then, it was important for me to show that it was happening also not only in small villages, but also in big cities. So I was kind of happy when I figured out one of those matzevot reused as to build pergolas in one of the Warsaw parks. Warsaw meaning Polish capital. Then people were quite often saying that, okay, so this was happening during the war because people were poor, or maybe right after the war. So it was also important to me to show them that, okay, this is not this easy answer to the difficult question of how we treated the Jews during the war, and what did we do with the heritage, Jewish heritage after the war. And it was like saying at the beginning, my friends were questioning and saying that, it was probably happening in the eastern part of Poland, which is considered to be a more poor part of Poland. So I would go to the east, but then I would try to find some examples in the west also. So for me, it was really, really important to show the entire spectrum of this problem. But also, as I said at the beginning, I was quite judgmental. So for me, it was all black and white. And then after a few years, I discovered that actually, the black and the white answers to these questions are not so interesting, and in fact they are not true. And this actually is quite similar to what we call black and white photography. We say that it's black and white, but in fact black and white is a mistake in photography. So black and white photography is about the grayscale between black and white. For me, it was important to try to convince the visitors of my exhibitions that don't look for the black and white judgmentals or black and white answers to the important questions. However, I could understand them because for me at the beginning, as I said, it was also black and white. So another thing that was really important for me here was the respect to the people, also to the people, like for example the cow barn or wall of the cow barn that you can see at the moment. So it would be very easy to say that this guy who owns the cow barn is just purely bad man. But we need to know that the owner of this cow barn wasn't the one who actually built it. Even he wasn't from the family who did it. So now when we all know of it, like what is our responsibility? This was kind of one of the important questions for me. So if I know now what I do about it, and then like don't be judgmental, but rather respectful and open. But on the other hand, also don't say that no one is responsible. Like I feel that we actually should do something about it. And I think that the next talk with Aleksandra, you will see like how different places can be commemorized. And for me, this is one of this process of awareness, of responsibility, but also of respect to the other people. So this is, I believe, what I wanted to tell you about my project. And yeah, thank you for having a chance for this.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alexandra Ayanos. I'm mostly a researcher, but also I'm involved in numerous art projects and curatorial projects related to difficult memory or so-called difficult heritage. And today I will tell you about a few projects that I've been involved in recently. But I would like to start by giving you a little bit of background regarding what I'm mostly interested in. And this is, in the first place, the landscape. So I'm mostly interested in the landscape of what I call non-sites of memory. And this is a term I borrowed from a Polish scholar, Roma Sendyka. Non-sites of memory are places that are neither commemorated nor forgotten. So they are not sites of memory, but they are not sites of oblivion either. And I'm interested in the ambivalence of these spaces and the way they manifest themselves in the landscape of Poland. And I'm interested in non-sites of memory that are related to the Holocaust. And it is also important for me that in the Western discourse about the Holocaust, we often think in terms of void and disappearance of the Jewish population. And this obviously also happened in Poland and created a void in Polish society. But what we also have here in Eastern Europe, and especially in Poland, is a certain excess of materiality of what remained after the Holocaust. So we have material heritage that belonged to Jewish people. We have the difficult heritage of former concentration and death camps. And we also have the human remains of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust. So I'm really, what I'm trying to do in my work is I'm trying to explore this local perspective and the localized knowledge related to this material witnesses of the Holocaust and this excess of materiality that I think we are dealing with. Here. So I'm very often working with things that are invisible for the naked eye, so that things that are not easily seen in the landscape, but the things that are there, or they need special lenses or certain perspectives to actually make them visible. And this also relates to looking into vernacular memory, so the local memory that is the memory of the local community, or the memory that is somehow archived in the landscape itself. And now I'll try to give you some examples of what I mean when I talk about it. So there are many places in Poland that are burial sites of Jewish victims of the Holocaust that are neither marked nor commemorated. Like, for example, this place that you see here in this image. And we estimate with experts from the foundation I am the part of, Zapomniane Foundation, that there's around 1,000 of such places in eastern and southern Poland. As the Zapomniane Foundation is aiming at locating, researching, marking, and commemorating these burial sites of Jewish victims of the Holocaust. So this is also another example. So as you can see, there's no visible sign of memory in these sites. And if you don't know the story of this place, you're like you can't actually guess or that this is a burial site of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust. And this is another example, and these are mostly, like, these sites are burial sites of people who were killed during so-called Holocaust by bullets. So these are not the people that died in death camps or concentration camps, but people that were shot on the edge of the forest or just by the road or in the middle of the farmland. And this is another example, and this is actually a place that is really important for me. This is a forest hideout that eventually became a grave of the people who were seeking shelter there, and there are a few people actually resting here in this place. So one of the things that I do might be called social interventions, and this is the case of the wooden matzevot. This is a project that we've been doing with the foundation for 4 years already. So we decided to create these wooden markers, and we, after we locate and study a burial site, we mark them with these wooden matzevot that were created. They were inspired by the pre-war wooden matzevot that could be encountered on Jewish cemeteries in Eastern Poland and also like Eastern Europe. So this project is aimed at intervening into the landscape of non-sites of memory with something which is like significant but very modest. So we are not aiming at creating big monuments there at first. We want to create this modern intervention, and after that collaborate with the local community and eventually create a permanent commemoration. So far we've marked around 50 burial sites with these wooden matzevot, and we are working on it all the time. So we aim to mark as many as we possibly can. And what is interesting, these wooden markers have their own life. So local communities and also people visiting these sites perform certain memory gestures or commemorative practices in these sites after they are marked. And this is something which we're observing with great interest to actually learn more about how these markers function in the landscape of Poland. Yeah, and this is like how the work actually look. So we travel to these sites after we research them. We just bring the markers and mark the sites, sometimes in presence of the local community, sometimes not. This is not the rule. It just depends on the site itself. And this is an example of how these markers work. So we observe people praying next to them, but also like local communities lighting candles and so on. And we also discovered that some of the markers, for example, somehow serve as an opening of the local knowledge. So sometimes people, after the marker is placed there, people start sharing stories about the people who were buried in a site like this. And in one place in southern Poland, there was a plaque with names of the victims added to the marker, because this is something that the local community actually knew. And this story was shared after the marker was placed in the site. So, and obviously what is also very interesting for us is that often these markers are a first step to a permanent commemoration, and this is one of the examples of such case in Eastern Poland, but it happened already in, if I'm correct, 6 different places. So the local community got involved, and the permanent commemoration actually was the next step after the marker was placed in such site. So these non-sites of memory, so these places and burial sites that weren't commemorated and neither commemorated nor marked, was also an important thing for us when we were working on this movie, which is called First Person Cartography, because as I told you at the beginning, these sites are well remembered by the local communities, but they are not commemorated. So the knowledge is there, and usually when we work with witnesses, they navigate through the landscape looking for certain points of reference to actually find their way to the site. So the movie First Person Cartography, which was a collaborated work of Solomon Nagler, Alexander, Schwarz, and myself, we were trying with this movie to actually document all the reference points that we know are like related to particular site, and we visited 5 different sites and documented all reference points that the witnesses might use when navigating through the landscape to actually get to these sites. And this also inspired other works that were shown in Warsaw in July 2019 as part of an exhibition titled Speculative Cartographies. And this was an example of art and research project that started with Solomon Nagler's and Henderson visit to Poland. And some objects that then were presented at the exhibition were objects inspired by the forensic research that actually the Zapomniane Foundation is using to study these sites, because we follow the rules of Halacha, so Jewish religious law, that is very clear about not disturbing the dead. So we actually have to be very careful not to intervene into the actual ground of the site. So we use different tools, for example, ground penetrating radar, LiDAR, and other forensic tools and cartographical tools to study these sites. And this object that you can see here in this picture is a transformation of an GPR, so ground penetrating radar image of the anomalies that can be seen in the GPR ecogram, because that's how the image from the GPR is called, proving that there is an anomaly that actually is for us a sign that this site is a grave. This is an object that was created by Alexander Schwarz and Wiesław Bartkowski. You can see it over here. Also, this is how the anomaly was, the image of the anomaly was transformed into the plexiglass. And this is another object that also is related to this, like navigating in the landscape and trying to make the invisible visible. And this object was also created by Alexander Schwarz and Wiesław Bartkowski. It's a compass that is supposed to help you navigate through the landscape, but the visitor experience of this object is the one of confusion rather than of certainty regarding the space that we are in, because this tool has the certain characteristics of the spaces of non-sites of memory encoded in it, but we don't give the audience any tips of how to actually use this object. So what we are trying to evoke with it is the confusion and the sense of being lost in the landscape, and like searching for signs that can confirm that this actually might be a site where there is this burial site of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust. And this object invited the audience to manipulate it, and after you put it in certain positions, you could see the lights going up or like becoming red, and that was the sign that you were maybe looking at the right direction. And last but not least, I'm also interested in new commemorative strategies in my projects. And this is a slightly different approach that I took in my most recent project. But it is also related to what I was already talking about. So different strategies in which we can either observe the memory manifesting itself in the landscape, or in which we can actually bring the memory to the landscape. And this is a performance that I co-created that happened in October, and it was a premiere of this work in October as part of the festival, which is a festival of new critical Jewish art in Krakow, and it was a performative piece called Still Standing, presented at the site of the former Płaszów concentration camp in Krakow. What is interesting is that the site of the former camp is one of the very few that hasn't been commemorated or musealized. So there is a monument, there are monuments, but the whole site is in fact like a vast green area that people are using as a park. So it works as a leisure and recreational area. And we decided to bring this performance into the space. The performance was based on the work of Israeli choreographer Noah Eshkol, who created in 1953 a choreography that was commemorating the uprising in the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw. So we took fragments of this choreography. There's only a several minutes long video left of this original piece from 1953. So we worked with this historical choreography, and we brought certain parts of this choreography to the space of the former Płaszów concentration camp, trying to bring also certain new commemorative strategies to the space, and it was happening during weekends. So there were people riding bikes and walking their dogs around, and they were stopping and looking at the piece, which was accompanied by audio recording that everybody could listen to. The audio was uploaded into the website, so everybody could easily access it with their phones. So they could observe this performance and also listen to the audio, explaining a little bit about what they are actually looking at, but also about dealing with the history of the site. And it was our idea or our attempt to overcome certain conflicts and tensions that are now related to the site of the former Wukash concentration camp, because there is an attempt by the city of Krakow and the local institutions to musealize this space and create like a monument and a museum there. But at the same time, this plan includes, for example, cutting out many trees. There were like over 300 trees, and actually it's an attempt to actually permanently change the space of the site, which for many people is important as it is, and the local communities who are very much opposing the idea of this museum, they are not against bringing the memory back to the site. They are just looking for different ways in which memory could manifest itself in the space of former Wukash concentration camp. And the performance Still Standing that I co-created together with choreographer Weronika Pelczyńska and a dancer Monika Szpuner was actually an attempt to open up a discussion with the local community and also with the city and representatives of institutions to actually discuss what other ways, other than, for example, cutting down trees and transforming radically this space, what other ways can be brought there and how we can collectively work with this space so that it can become a memory site or a place of memory, but at the same time being still a space of nature, which somehow is also a living archive of this site. Yeah, so I guess these are the projects that I wanted to tell you today and that I wanted to talk about today, and thank you very much.
Great. I thought just before we open it up to the Q&A, I'll just for folks that maybe came a bit late, again, I can just quickly remind you that on the website here, you can find the work of our Polish collaborators along with the work that's in the library. We have these two works here are from the Zapomniane Institute. They're photographs. A landscape slash deathscape is a film collaboration between Wukash, Alexandra, and Schwarz. And Maxwell for Everyday Life is for everyday use. Sorry, is a documentation of a bunch of photos from that series by Wukash Baksik. Great, and of course, there's the other works are here. You can click on them and you can look at the works virtually. Great. Okay, so I'm going to now open it up for questions. Now, I do have the ability to unmute questions, to unmute various participants who have questions. So I'm going to open up the Q&A. Hold a sec. Here, okay, so we have an anonymous attendee. I don't know, I can read this and then maybe we can answer it. If you have a question, you can also put up your hand and I can unmute you and you can also ask that way. So we have a question here. How do you balance artistic creativity in crafting a piece of art with the ability to inform others on the events? So I don't know, Ange, did you perhaps want to answer that one? Or are we mute? No, we're not mute. Okay.
Can I see the question again?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question that actually came up in various ways at the exhibition in Warsaw. I think namely in the work that I did, because it was sort of presented as tools, or, in the sense that perhaps these things could be a way of documenting or navigating this landscape. I think the question of artistic production in these kinds of sites of genocide, there's always a question or a concern, I suppose, of sort of falling short. It seems like a very difficult area or kind of content to engage with. So I think there is a concern for that, but I do think, in going into these places, which are primarily located, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours away from the center of Warsaw, in very small villages, doing this work, staying in that place, and then taking, that research back to the city center and crafting, the work from it, or even bringing it here to Halifax and doing that work. It sort of raises the question about, what is in it for the community who, for generations, live with this history. And so there is a lot of artistic production and initiatives that are starting to be undertaken, where there's this, as Alexandra kind of started to mention, where there's these actions and kind of participatory site-specific events that are situated in these communities with the invitation of the community to join. This particular work, I would just end by saying that in working with, I think, the foundation that's already established a rapport with these communities, and does, as Alexandra pointed out, does engage with the with the community in the commemoration of these sites. There is a kind of, I think, acceptance or a sort of understanding that these activities take place. But also that doesn't mean that they're welcome or accepted by communities. So I think it really highlights the necessity to think about creative production as a way of moving into the community and being, made accessible.
Great. We have another question here, which I think maybe Kayla, if you're okay answering this, I think this would be a really good question for you to answer if you're comfortable with that.
Sure.
Maybe I'll read it out and then you can answer. How does that sound?
Sure.
Great. So the question is, do you place more importance on the emotive power of the displays, photos, or artworks, or the ability for the work to inform the general public?
I think the emotive power of the artwork or the display speaks to its ability to inform the public. Like, I don't think if people didn't have like an emotional or some other type of connection with the information that was displayed, it wouldn't be as potentially successful in communicating some of that information that needs to be communicated.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Kayla. There's another question here from Rebecca Barker. Now, Becca, I'm gonna unmute you in case you wanted to actually ask it, or I can read it. So you're unmuted. So if you wanted to say hello and ask a question, or I can ask it for you.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. So Saul, I was really intrigued by your project, actually, when you were talking about the two different ways you presented them, the photograms. And I I wondered I understand that you, from what you said, that you, part of why you edited the footage together for the current exhibition was maybe partially due to, sort of limitations of, space and whatever, and COVID and stuff. But I wondered if that changed anything for you in the project, like as far as putting those images sort of in a sequence of linear time and you being the one deciding, what order to put them in. Did that have any effect on you about what kind of possible, meaning the images carried, or the relationship with the audience?
Yeah, I think
does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, totally. It's a really good question. And, it actually created quite a, I'm glad you brought it up because it did create quite a dilemma for me, because in the Speculative Cartographies exhibition in Poland, each of the photos that were presented were very specific to the site. So basically every single still that was pulled out would tell you what was the flora from that site that it was collected from and photographed, and then turned into a transparency that people would then sort of have their own way of being able to look at it and sort of like, transpose on other images. And, throughout the whole project, I was faced with, frankly, moral dilemma. Like, I am basically taking a site of trauma and creating a montage out of it. And I was questioning, personally, I questioned the ethics of that as I was making the work, because I was sort of I wouldn't say aestheticizing trauma, but I was using these sites of trauma and then creating a light sculpture from it. And I think that, I don't think there's specifically no right or wrong, but I think it just brought up a lot of things in my process as to whether or not this is something that's respecting the site that I'm in. Because in a sense, as a filmmaker, I think about what can make this a beautiful montage, what can make this something that is really alluring and interesting and immersive. But then the source of them is something that's really horrific. So on the one hand, when I had the photographs and it was more expletive of where those plants were taken from, it was much more of almost like an educational thing and people to sort of talk about those spaces. But then when I created into a montage, it was like I was creating something beautiful, immersive, without necessarily that explanation. So I think that's a really good question, and I don't really have an answer, aside from the fact that at least in the Polish exhibition in Warsaw, at least I had that balance, and I don't have it here. So I'm still a bit stuck. To be perfectly frank.
I just want to say, before you force me back into mute world, how much I'm enjoying, or how much I really appreciate the work in this exhibition, and all of you talking about it. And I really think those images are very, very interesting, in the phytograms too. So I love that that's an active question for you, and it would be for me too. And I'm grateful that you wanted to speak to it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for your question. It's great. Okay, cool. We have one more question here, and then we can open it up to the floor. If there's anybody who wants to speak, we can unmute you. So this is a very interesting question that I hope we can answer. Do the politics of implicating Polish citizens in the Holocaust, for example, the taking of gravestones, of neighbors taking their Jewish neighbors' belongings after they were deported from their homes, clash with information or commemorating the events that occurred in Poland? We actually have our colleagues here as well, who could probably also engage in that. We have Dorota Glowacka, who's here, who, you're welcome to join this conversation, Dorota. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you might be able to maybe provide more of an informed answer to this than we do. I think that when we proposed the exhibition, there was, I think some of us are familiar with the law that was passed by the Polish government that was, trying to manage and navigate through Polish complicity of the Holocaust, and whether or not the research could actually say, there was some sort of collaboration or implication of fault with the Polish nation and crimes of the Holocaust. And there were certain restrictions that were proposed. And except there were some interesting caveats there about how artists had a space that they can engage in discussions without any sort of fear of being locked up or fined. And so that's where we saw our in specifically. So, I think that I wish our Polish collaborators were here to be able to answer that more, because they are there on the ground and they have more to say about this. We also have some people in attendance. There's a Halifax, Warsaw-based filmmaker, Eric Bednarski, that might be able to speak to that as well. But I don't know, Dorota, are you around? Did you want to speak to this at all? Or maybe if you want, I don't know if you want to unmute, or if anyone else would like to speak to this as well.
Okay, I unmuted myself. I can speak to that and maybe pass it over to Eric, but then I also have a question for Angela. It's just a paradox that I constantly struggle with, and I'm in awe in Poland that there are those kind of two strands. I sometimes refer to it as two Polands, right? That there is this intense, dedicated, committed effort to excavate that history and commemorate that history, and the realization that this history is just so inextricable, and it's just such a part of the history of Poland, right? and it is really genuine and really emotive in so many ways. And this does go hand in hand with anti-Semitism. I was actually quite in awe that none of those, I wish we could ask Ola, now none of those 50 markers have been vandalized, right? Like all you hear is like graffiti of swastikas like on the walls and like, you know, vandalization and so forth. But this didn't seem to have happened in those spaces. So we have to consider the tension. It's there. It's always there. It's a kind of, I don't know, the paradoxes of Polish memory, right? And we need to hold them together, like in one hand, in one palm, and be gentle with it, you know?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dorota. I mean, Eric, I don't want to put you on the spot, and I don't know if you're unmuted, but you are unmuted if you wanted to add something. But Eric Bednarski is a filmmaker living in Warsaw now. Would you, oh, sorry, I got to allow you to talk. So are you wanting to say something, Eric? No pressure.
Well, I don't, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, well, I don't have too much to add. I do agree with what Dorota said, that there are very much two Polands. And I've experienced those two Polands in the past 10 years living in Warsaw. So I think it really depends where you are, who you're talking to, what you're trying to commemorate in particular. I don't want to make any sweeping sort of generalizations. But in the last 5 years especially, things have gone in a rather unfortunate direction. So I guess that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you so much, Eric. And sorry to put you on the spot. I didn't know that you weren't prepared to say anything. Great. I'm sorry, Dorota, you had a question that you wanted to bring up as well.
Sure. Thanks, Eric, for chiming in. And so considerate, you know, with your answer. I think I wanted to ask Angela and kind of also Alexandra in absentia. So you will have to ventriloquate, what's the word? You know, be a ventriloquist for Alexandra as well. But I was kind of looking at your work, and to me it's kind of very conceptual, but at the same time it gives me goosebumps, you know? So I find it very paradoxical that it is so cerebral and it just affects me, it kind of in my body at the same time, right? So that is quite incredible. And to think that you somehow condensed, I don't know, I feel these objects are like condensed like time space. Okay, and then you can hold it in your hand. It's incredible, right? But so I'm interested in this kind of affective aura around these objects, and like the affect that comes to mind, but in a positive way, is like the uncanny, right? But another thing I wanted to ask, I say it's like a three-dimensional object that condenses time-space, but I wonder whether there is a kind of fourth or fifth dimension, which is spectrality. And whether you work with the concept of the specter, which I very much also saw in Ola's work in the film.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's okay. Well, thank you for your comment and your observations. I would like to say that I do. I think I'm always kind of circling around, and certainly like the idea of, I'm thinking, I'm trying to recall the author who I've been looking at recently about spectral, oh my God, sorry, I can't recall it, but it doesn't matter. But I do, I'm kind of just grappling with where to start with that, because certainly it is something that, and I don't know how to really talk about this without it sounding cheesy, and maybe it's because it's not resolved in my own mind, but the feeling of being in those places is something strange. Like, you know, you walk through these forests that, as I'd mentioned, almost all of them are managed forests, and so the landscape is sort of this repetitive, you know, there's nothing that sort of stands out if you didn't actually know the landscape. And then all of a sudden you're there, you're in this space. And, you know, for most of the work that was done in these spaces, you know, we spent between 5 and 8 hours actually in the space. So for me, it was a lot of time sort of sitting, wandering out into the forest to see how far I could go and then come back, and just kind of trying in some small way to listen. And I can't honestly say that I found a response or whatever, but I think that that's also sort of a long-term project, this idea of listening, especially in relation to nature. And then, of course, I have a very analytical mind, and was thinking about the tools at my disposal, including my own body and moving through space as a way of mapping or recording a spatial kind of experience, let's say. So I think right there, there's the time space sort of collapse that you think about or that you've observed is sort of inherent in the process, and the idea of trying to think about cartography as an embodied practice. That what emerges is this kind of essence of a spectra, or I think that I'm very happy to hear that, and to hear that sort of like felt in the work. In the iteration in Poland, I had crafted this sort of X form like this out of larch in a wood shop, and then wrapped these string maps around those forms. And I think it still had a very kind of analytic kind of feel to it. Whereas taking something, like the fallen branches or the cut branches actually from the Point Pleasant forest, there's kind of almost a bodily form that those branches kind of have. And then of course, like wrapping it in the string is in a way abstracting, the identification of that form as branch and revealing this kind of organic form that, so I don't know if I'm kind of rolling in circles there, but there's something that sort of emerged unintentionally with trying to record this kind of spatial information onto these forms. And then likewise with the CNC forms, a lot of the aesthetic of those forms come out of working with a tool that's sort of inadequate in a way. The router bit was dull. But at the same time, the circumstances and the tools sort of forge this object. And so the kind of serendipity of things and this kind of unlearning and letting a process and a result unfold from that process is something, I guess conceptually I'm quite interested in. So maybe I'll just leave it there. But thank you for your thoughts and your feedback on that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Dorota. We have Brittany. I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question in your own voice. So you should be able to talk now. Or not. Brittany, are you there? You had your hand up. I'm not sure if you're. Okay. Maybe I'll just leave it for now. I'll leave you unmuted if you wanted to. Oh, 1 second. Okay. Just a note, 1 second. Sure. Yeah, whenever you're ready. You can also type it out if you're more comfortable doing that. Okay, so Brittany's going to type question. I'm going to unmute you. And if anyone else has any other questions as well, while Brittany is typing, you can also just put it in the Q&A directly into the chat, or put up your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask your question in your own voice if you'd like. Oh, perfect. Okay. Is there a tension between traditional forms of commemoration and more artistically minded forms? That's a really good question. I don't know. I guess either Kayla or Angela or I can mention that. Or did you want to answer that one? You can.
Well, did you want to say something first, Kayla?
Yeah, Kayla, did you want to say something?
No, that's
okay.
No worries. A tension between traditional forms of tension's an interesting word. I think, yeah, there is. When I think of, I mean, I don't know, I shouldn't say it so definitively, but when I think of traditional forms of commemoration, and you know, specifically in Poland, and I can't speak at length to this, but one thing that really stood out for me was this interesting, I don't know if interesting is a strong enough word, but like this tendency for the markers of the history of the Holocaust to bear sort of Christian, I don't know what the word, symbols. So like, you know, marking the Warsaw Ghetto, the gates of the Warsaw Ghetto with a cross, you know, and yet you see this throughout Poland, in rural communities, in urban center, well, in Warsaw. I haven't been to another urban center in Poland. But I don't know if, you know, if we can look to that as an example of traditional commemoration, but it did seem to kind of be like permeate the kind of Polish memory or commemoration of the Holocaust. But I guess when I think of other, you know, ways that the Holocaust is commemorated, say like in Germany, for example, you know, there is kind of this, Alexandra mentioned it, this presence of absence, you know, the void is marked in various ways. We can think of, you know, different architectural installations or museums, these kind of austere, angular, you know, they bear kind of similar aesthetic qualities. And so I feel like, you know, artistic kind of methodologies and forms of commemoration are maybe trying to draw out more of a multiplicity of narratives around these kinds of histories, either through, you know, performed actions like we saw with the work that Alexandra showed us at the end of her presentation, or even if you think of the, look at the Matsevo, the wooden form, and, you know, the fact that that material over time, subjected to the environment of the forest, is going to, you know, change and degrade. So it seems, you know, as one observation of kind of difference, which maybe is tension, is this tendency to commemorate using sort of, you know, materials that are kind of intended in perpetuity versus ephemeral acts or materials that have kind of a lifespan that's kind of shortened in a way,
or the landscape itself.
The landscape itself.
And yeah. I think this is most evident as well, like Ola was saying in Krakow, where, you know, the idea of erecting this gigantic Liebeskin, and it's not going to be done a Liebeskin, but somebody who's going to be building this memorial museum in Krakow, you know, I think a lot of artist activists see that as a very violent act. And I think even Dorota, you're welcome to, you know, again, contribute to this, because I think you are someone that knows far more than any of us, you know, could contribute to this, about the, you know, the politics of Polish Holocaust commemoration. You know, but I think that in terms of our colleagues who we work with, there's obviously a desire to see something much more, you know, experimental, first-person, performative in these spaces. So, yeah, Dorota, you're welcome to if you wanted to add something, but no pressure. In the meantime, we have other questions. Thank you, Brittany, for your question. And if there's a follow-up question, just feel free to put it in the chat. Are there any other questions from people who are attending, or even we have a few people that are panelists, that are collaborators, that might want to ask a question? Okay. Well, with that, we can, oh, what's that? Oh, Dorota, yeah, you're on.
If nobody else is asking, I will ask, although this is not exactly speaking to the question you asked me before, although somewhat. It may be an observation, but perhaps both Kayla and Angela can speak to that, and Ola, you know, and Wukash, because I just find it really fascinating how there is this intertwining of the landscape and word. Like it's really unprecedented. Like obviously it's a cliche to say that, you know, these forests are these like mute or whatever, deaf and dumb, so to speak, witnesses, and they need the narrative to enliven them. So that's a cliche, but the way it works in these spaces and then generates, you know, like the space generates more narrative, then feeds into the space. It's like a kind of like a chiasmus, you know, they are like constantly intertwined. It has never struck me that powerfully as it has in these works, right? And like even the exhibit, you know, you curated it, Kayla, you just kind of put, you know, little captions, but still that like word like animates, like even transforms the space of that library into a forest, you know? It's really powerful.
Oh, thank you. I was really trying to kind of transport people to the place so that we could kind of be in, or imagine being in the space and being all encompassed by that kind of landscape. Something that was really that really stood out to me is in Mi'kmaq culture, there's a concept called Msit Nugama, which means all of my relations, and it speaks to everything in the world being connected, whether or not that's like the trees or the leaves or the like landscapes that we are part of. So that was something that I was always thinking about while curating this exhibit, was that the people who are now in those places or who were murdered in those places are now extensions of, the plants and the landscape are now extensions of those people who were placed there against their will. And the trees and all of the like flora and fauna in those places are now part of that, and they are the things that we should be commemorating and memorializing, so that the people whose bodies like were decomposing and feeding those landscapes can now be celebrated, if that makes sense.
Actually, just I didn't have a paper and pen with me when I was in the library, so I just like jotted this note on my phone that like really speaks to what you said. And what my note said is there is a caption in like one of the panels that says, well, these people lie beneath, and I thought they don't really lie beneath, you know. Mm-hmm. And they are not really people. It's like everything is now kind mm-hmm. of so connected, right? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I just want to add one last thing about the sort of curatorial strategy. I don't know if that's the word for it, but of being in that circular space. Like it really kind of feels in a way like the way that we view things through a virtual or mediated environment, this kind of, you know, panning around this. But then, you know, within that space, especially with the COVID restrictions and the direction you put on the floor outside the space to limit distance. And so I think with that, the experience in that space, at least for me, was a kind of solo or like, I'm not sure that I would have sort of had the same kind of collapsing of this digital eye and this experiential or being in those sites in the same way as if others had been in there. So I found it interesting that this kind of one person experience within the exhibition really was, I don't know, I thought kind of created sort of a tension between like the way that the architecture of the space and, you know, these images, many of them digital or mediated images, and then these sort of first-hand accounts sort of all, I don't know, I really got the sense of those kind of spaces kind of collapsing together. It's maybe hard to explain, but I thought that was a really interesting and an effective way that restriction kind of opened up the space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for that question. Are there, and thank you, Kayla, for sharing that. That was wonderful. Okay, so we're going to have a last call for any questions there may be from folks there. You know, we are available to, as well, if anyone wants to reach out, information about the exhibition, you can contact us through the website or, just through the AJC. So yeah, if there's any other questions, because I know personally when I see work like this, I really need to reflect, and it sort of ends up something that comes up quite a bit after the fact. But yeah, so are there any last questions before we sign off for the evening? Okay. Edna, are you still there? I think you're still there. So I think that I want to, again, there we go. Hi. So I want to thank, again, Edna, thank you so much and you and Dorota for sort of, helping to, with all of the sort of stuff that was going during COVID, I feel like that we all really needed this experience, virtual, and then also in the library. We've personally had it's been a wonderful experience for all of us involved, and get our RAs and everyone. Yeah, it was just a really wonderful experience. So Edna, thank you, and the AJC, really appreciate it for your collaboration.
Well, thank all of you. I really appreciate it. This was an amazing session, and Kayla, you did an extraordinary job setting up the library. It was very powerful, and I appreciate everybody's energy. It's a challenging time to put together these programs, and I think this was very successful, and I look forward to this project evolving and us being able to present more together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Okay.
we will do more for sure in the future. And maybe, Edna, do you want to give a shout out to what's happening? There's a couple more events happening for Holocaust Education Week. Maybe you just want to mention that quickly before we.
We have a film this weekend. So from Friday until Sunday, you'll be able to watch the film at your leisure, The Crossing. And that is great. It's a family-friendly film. So I think everybody should enjoy that. And then we come back in January where we're working on programs for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So I'll send out that info.
Great. Thank you. And just so you know, this video will be also on our website that has the virtual exhibition. If you wanted to rewatch and some of the questions, and you're free to use any of these resources to show your friends or for any sort of research that you're doing. Thank you, everybody. Be safe and take care. And thank you so much for spending time with us in the virtual world. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.